Probably a good number to go ahead and get started. And I think I saw that the recording has started, so I will fade into the background and help people through the chat box. So.
Great, thanks so much. So yeah, my name is Rich. I'm the maintainer of the GT package. And I work at RStudio, been there for about 2.5 years. Really happy to be here to show you lots about GT. It's a 3-hour long workshop. Not 4 hours, maybe it's fine. We're going to try to get through as much as possible. This package has tons of functions, but I'm trying to give you the most important ones and tons of examples. And basically the flow of this workshop is I go through a bunch of RMD files. You can definitely comment in the chat, or you can even straight up just like say something like, I don't get that, or stuff like that. Put it in the chat and I'll definitely answer you if I see it. I'm hoping this, I have the chat window in the corner, so I'll see the question or whatever, and I'll definitely respond. And my goal is to get through all these different modules, give you some practice time, 20 minutes before each hour of this workshop, and just try to show you as much GT as possible in the clearest way possible. So let's see if we can do that. First, I'll tell you a bit more about me. I live here, and I'll just zoom out. This is a town of Oakville, just so you know where I'm close to the lake. It won't show me that though. Google Maps, come on. Anyways, I live in Oakville. It's right by Toronto. It's you know, the weather's pretty good. Just thought I'd tell you a bit about where I'm from, because we don't have much time to talk about this stuff. That's a little bit about me. And the GT repo, you may know this, it's here on rstudio.gt, that repo right there. And a lot of what we'll go through today will be from this function reference, which is in the GT website. It's also linked in the repo. I'm going through it in pretty much in order from top to bottom, omitting some of the functions that are not incredibly important for a 3-hour workshop, and just trying to give you a sense of what GT can do and how to use it and time to sort of experiment with it. Okay, great. So let's start with RStudio Cloud. If you want to follow along just by watching, that's totally cool. You can have this open and play around with the examples while I'm doing it myself. Or you can download from the repo, which there's a separate repo for all these RMDs, which I don't have a link for, but I did tweet about it, so it's around. Okay, so let's start. What we're doing today is we're starting with the dev version of GT using install GitHub. The reason for that is we just added some support for RTF output, and I want to demonstrate that to you really briefly that it can be done. I'll even just show you the RTF as well, opening up in Word. So yeah, so the order will be some functions about creating a table, and then we'll get to like the part where we modify the parts of the table, take a practice break, then all about formatting of the data inside cells, column-wide modifications. There's a bunch of functions just for that. The practice session. Then we'll deal with how to make summaries inside GT tables, which is kind of cool. So basically summary lines, you can aggregate data and create new data inside GT. And then there's a bunch of convenience functions, which allow you to shortcut a lot of the options that sort of take effect on the whole table. I'll show you a few of those, and some of those are pretty neat. So pretty excited to show you that as well. And then we'll finally wrap up with the last practice session. And in any of these practice sessions, you could definitely ask questions, I'll answer them. It'll be a little bit easier. Okay, so I'll start with the first module, which is create table. So this is about creating a table and exporting it. So when you have a table, like a regular table, like a table or a data frame, you pass that to GT, the function GT, not the package, but the function called GT, which is right here. I'll demonstrate that to you right now. So with all these RMDs, I show you the complete function with all its arguments and its default values, just so you have a reference and some sense of place that we're starting from. I also want to tell you that GT comes with a whole ton of data sets. There's actually 6 of them here. And we'll mostly be using the exhibit data set, primarily because it's a small data set. It's only like 8 rows and it fits on a screen. So it's great for examples, has different column types, There's some NAs in there. It's great for experimenting. So I'll use that a lot. But it's also a little bit boring. So we'll actually get to some of these other data sets as well too. But we have to trim them down with filter and some other dplyr stuff to to make it fit on a screen. So let me show you what exhibit looks like. Right there, really simple. Just a few columns, different types, those NAs I've been telling you about. And it's great for experimenting with. So let's show you exhibit as a GT table.
Hey, Rich.
Oh.
Hey, Rich.
Yeah.
Hey, sorry to bother, man. Real quick note, the audio is breaking up just a little bit. I'm just wondering if you turn off your cam, it might help a little bit with the feed.
Sure.
And it also makes things a little bit bigger in Zoom because then we won't see the attendee list at the top. Trying to figure out if there's a way for you to do that, or if John does that, or maybe it's just
I can
me.
maximize the screen.
Yeah, maximize that puppy.
Help
there
a little
you
bit.
go. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I try to make the text big, and the table fits. So
yeah,
I'm hoping good. People are not squinting. Okay. Anyways, so this is exhibit as a GT table. So we can see it inside this chunk as the output. Great. It's not too bad to begin with. That's how you make a GT table. That's the beginning. You can do a lot more. That's what the rest of this workshop's about. So that's the basic layout. It has column labels and body cells. That's just what we call it. So we can do more stuff with the GT function. We can actually make a stub, which is essentially like a column to the left, which is row labels, to put it in the most simple way possible. So I'm going to run this function using the row name call argument and using the column called row. And what that does, see, there's no column label now. And the column, which used to be, like row, is now to the left. It's a little bit offset. There's a bit of a dividing line. Essentially, these are row labels. So that's what we have there. Okay. And we can do even more. So that's a stub. We have a stub now. We can even make groups. So we have this column right here called group. And these are categoricals, see group A, group B. Better to show you than to explain it. So here it is. So what we've done now is we've arranged the rows into different groups. There's a row group label above each of those. And if they're not together, like contiguous, they'll be put together in the order that they're in. So that's how that works. It'll automatically gather up the rows for you. Great. So now we have a GT table with row groups and a stub. Okay.
Rich, one last request, man. I'm so sorry, man. But if you can just get rid of the files on the right-hand side, people are asking in the chat box just to make it a little bit bigger. That would be super helpful.
Yeah. I'll make this even bigger. How's that?
Yeah, much better. And I think they're saying Control-Shift-1 will hide the files pane, but I don't know how to get it back.
Oh, so I can just. I might need it. I'll just do this. So I can see the numbers.
There you go. Yeah. All right. Perfect. Okay. Thanks.
No, thank you. So we may have some weird data sets like empty cars, which have row names, like real row names in the data frame. We can actually use that. It's a little bit rare, but we can use the argument row names to stub, set it to true. And all of a sudden we have, the car names as, basically labels in the stub. So there's some way to use those. It's a little bit odd, but it can be done. So if you're into dplyr, and who isn't these days, you can do group by. And if you have a group tibble, you can pass that into GT and it'll know what to do. Check this out. So we have group by group, and then we're setting the stub, and it just does it. So basically, it knows that this is a grouped column, and it just uses that. And you can have more things in the group too. You can have like 2 or 3 things in the group. I'll show you that right now. So this is the pizza place data set. I'll show you that. It's a rather massive data set with almost 50,000 rows, and it's about sales at a pizza place. And what I'm doing is I'm cutting this down a bit, filtering to just a few things, grouping by, slicing each of the groups with slice head, so we just get 3. And then I'm using this row group dot step. Sorry about the name here. This is really poorly chosen, but we've delivered that now. And this actually separates the names of the groups. So it'll flatten them and create the groups like this. So there should be 3 rows per group. It's a little hard to scroll, but you can sort of get the picture here. Great. X that out. Okay, so that's everything about the GT function, which is kind of fundamental because you need that to get into the GT API, essentially. There's another function which may not be used so much. It's kind of just a one-off function called GT preview. All it does is you can take any size data set and it'll just give you a preview, basically the top 5 rows, and by default, the bottom 1 row. It'll give you row numbers as well. So you can take a pretty big data set. GT cars isn't really big, but it's good enough for this example. And we see that we have row numbers in the stub. We have what rows we're not showing, and then the last row. And then it just gives you a preview. So it's very predictably sized. You can just get a preview of a data set with this. So keep that in mind. If you have a big data set, you just want to see the top and bottom. And of course, there's all sorts of little options to remove the row numbers. So if you want to do that, you can totally do that too. It'll still give you this sort of like ellipsis row, but otherwise you can see big data sets in a small amount of space in GT. The last thing I want to show you in this module, this is a short one. Other modules will be much bigger than this, is GT save. So if you need to save a GT table as a file, and this could be like a PNG file, it could be like an HTML file, RTF, PDF, all those, you can do that with GT save. So I'm just going to make the table here as my example table. It's not going to show anything because I just assigned it to GT_table. And what I'm doing now is I'm using GT save. And how it creates that file is it just recognizes the extension you put. And sometimes there's like additional arguments you can put, but just specialized for the type of file. But the way you do it is, you just put the extension in and it'll give you the right file. It'll use the right output format and spit out the correct file for you. So let me show you this. I'll just do it. So I'll show you it runs. This as well. It doesn't tell you anything. It just creates the file. And here's the RTF. So it should be here on the left. I'm going to do something kind of crazy here. This is the RTF file. I'm just going to click it. Word should open. Maybe. Oh, no, hang on. There's a download. OK, one sec here. I just want to prove that this actually. And it names it file show. I don't know why it does that. That's a cloud thing. But if you're just working on GT in RStudio, it should give you the right name. So this is the RTF version opened up in Word of that table, which is basically the exhibit table, which has group row names and a stub. Cool. So let's get back to this. Great. So to summarize, some quick points here. If you want to make a GT table, got to use the GT function. There's a few options in GT, the function, for adding group rows and a stub. If you need a quick preview of a table, doesn't matter what the table size is, use GT preview. You can save a GT table in a file with GT save and just use the right extension. I'm gonna see my chat. Any questions? Okay, I got a question here. Does RTF output support GTMD? It does. It does. We worked kind of hard to get Markdown support working. So as much as we could, we got certain things to translate from Markdown to RTF. Definitely things like bolding, lists, things like that. So RTF is not that bad. Even HTML is okay. It'll recognize certain HTML things and try to convert that as well. Can GT be exported directly into docx format? Unfortunately not. That's the next thing we'll be working on. It's unfortunately two very different things to code up. So it's like two giant epics of work, but that'll be the next thing we do because there's an equivalently sized group that wants that as well. So the future I see will be one where you can use R Markdown and have a Word document with GT tables in it and just RTF export if you need that, if you want to cobble together some files. Yeah, docx, it's going to happen. Just give it time, it will. Okay, so that's the first module. We're doing pretty good for time. I want to get on to the next one. This is all about creating and modifying parts of a table. And the functions we'll be using in this will all be the ones that, all the functions that start with tab _. So tab stub head, tab spanner, tab header, so on and so forth. There's a huge amount of helper functions. I kind of apologize. This is pretty massive, but they kind of operate in the same way. There's these cells _ functions, which are for targeting. So So for some of these functions, you need to tell GT, like, what are you focusing on? Like, where do you want this change to happen? You do that with like cells underscore. And each one of these has their own little interface. And for defining styles, it's unfortunately just named cell underscore. And that's for setting styles. So there's a combination of this and that. We'll see that in a second. So let's get on to the first one here, which is tab stub head. A bit of a boring one. So you saw in the previous module that you can have a stub, essentially that column of labels on the left, but it doesn't have a label above it. It basically, like it's basically the corner of like the table. But you can add a label there. You can do that with tab stub head, and it's simple. You just use this function and give it the label. The cool thing is for a lot of these bits of text that you add to GT, you can use the MD or HTML helper function. And what that means is you can put markdown like in that label or HTML, and it'll interpret it as such. Okay, so let me show you this. So this is taking GT cars, that data set, trimming it down, only selecting a few columns, only giving us the first 5 rows, then making that stub based on the model column, and then adding the label car. A little bit boring, but it sort of like proves the point. Now, if you want to use MD, you can do that right here. And then, I would do something like this, like just make it bold. Hopefully it should run again. There we are. So now it's in bold, and we can do whatever we want. We can make it, just a bit of text. You can do all sorts of crazy things in here if you want to. Okay, so that's tab stub head. So the next one, tab spanner. So we get to add a spanner column label. So these are like labels above the column labels, and they may span above multiple of these. So to do this, we can use a number of these like tie select expressions. And we recognize this from dplyr for selecting columns. It could be contains, matches, starts with, ends with, or all columns using everything. So let's use GT cars again, cutting down the size. Let's make it small. So we'll use that for further examples. This is just the table itself. We'll take a look at the table in GT, just passing the GT and specifying the row name column or the stub using the model column. So it looks pretty good. Okay, so now we're going to use tab spanner. So the label, and again, we can use MD or HTML. Most people will use MD if they wanted to. And let's actually change this to do this. And in this case, we'll just put 1 star around. There we go. And so the spanner is going to go above all these columns. We're specifying them with vars. And just like in ggplot, vars is used for specifying columns of the data set. So we'll do that for all these columns. Great. So there's performance, our label, our tab spanner, or right above all these columns that we specified. Good, good. So that's how you do a spanner. Any questions about this? Okay, we'll just...
Yeah, I think we got some questions, Rich. If you want to tackle them now. I don't know if it's exactly related to this, but Beth had some questions. If you want, I can read them out loud to you, or if you can see them in the chat box, that's fine too.
Yeah, in the PDF, that doesn't quite work too well right now. So we're actually not recommending you do that for the time being. That's gonna be fixed. That's also another sort of thing we're doing, sort of like along with word output. But for now, I would skip getting the PDF.
And Rich, I think they're wondering, like, if you put GT into an R Markdown report and then knit the R Markdown report to PDF or Word, would that work, or is that not supported for GT?
Currently, just HTML works well, and okay. RTF is what you want to export with GT save.
Got it. Got it. And GT, someone's asking about what GT stands for. You want to tackle that one?
Well, I guess unofficially grammar of tables, but I thought it just sounded cool, just being GT. It can be wherever you want it to be. It might as well be grammar tables, even though the book hasn't been written. So let's go with that. So I got another question here about multiple levels of tab spanning. Unfortunately, no, we just have it at 2 levels. I know 3 is probably what a lot of people want or more. But that is definitely something that we want to do in the future. So we know it's a limitation for the time being.
And people are talking about or asking about GT and Shiny support.
Yeah. It could be used in Shiny. It's not the best because it's not interactive. Like you don't have like controls for, like pagination or anything like that. But if you're okay with that so far, it's definitely usable in Shiny. It has Shiny functions and they're outlined actually right here. Render GT and GT output. Okay, good stuff. So now we'll do this one right here. So with this one, all I was trying to demonstrate is that if you have columns which are not together, they'll actually be grouped together, like gathered. So let me show you the table before adding the spanner. Okay, and we see HP is far away from these other columns. So what it'll do is by default, it'll just gather all the columns together and then put the spanner above it. So it'll basically sort of like go to the first column and then bring them together. And you can set that to false. There's actually an option to not gather. So it's basically, I can find the function. Well, it's right here. Let me show you. Gather is false. And see, it'll leave it by its lonesome like that, which is sometimes desirable, but mostly not. So the default is to always gather. Okay, so the next function is tab header. It's all about adding a header sort of row above all, like sit at the top of the table. So let's use GT cars again, and we'll create a header part with a title and a subtitle. So tab header, title, subtitle, we're using Markdown, and we'll see here, this is in code font. Okay, so that's the header. And you can do all sorts of other things too with this, like use HTML, for instance, add in some tags if you really need to. But essentially, this is just for adding a title and a subtitle. And the subtitle is optional. You could just have a title. Great. So a source note is essentially like a footnote, except it doesn't have like a glyph that associates the note with any part of the table. Basically just puts a line of text at the bottom. And you can have a bunch of these. So use tab source note, and you just provide the note right there. So let me show you that. Okay, so I have to scroll to the bottom so we can see that. So the example data set is available in the GT package. Great. Now this is written in Markdown. So if you don't put the MD, wrap it in MD, it'll just show it as literal text. So we can do this. And then we get it in the style text. Okay, footnotes. They are essentially the same as source note, except they have a reference to a part of the table. So use this is kind of similar to tab source note. You put in the note text, except this time you specify locations. So the idea is you can make it a process to add a footnote to a GT table. And there are 2 components to the footnote mark and the footnote text. So we have to use one or more of these, usually one of these cells functions to specify the location where the actual number or the letter goes. So cells title, that means we're targeting the table title or subtitle. Stubhead, we're targeting the table stubhead cell. Column spanners or labels, row groups, the body, and the summary, which we'll see later. And if you have multiple of these, you can enclose the entire set in a list. Okay, so let me show you just an example in GT. There's a table. So we're going to add a footnote and affix it to this right here, this factor cell.
Yeah, Rich, there's a question in the chat, which I have the same question.
Okay. Footnotes be directly after the table. Yes. Unfortunately for now, it's always attached to the table and doesn't actually use the footnotes feature of any format. So with RTF, we're not actually, using the, we're not actually making, real footnotes in a way. But that is definitely a thing to improve upon. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. So I'm going to run this. And you see right now, we have number 1, where factor is, and we have the note at the bottom, and the number 1 again. And if you don't like numbers, we can actually change this. It's one of the options. It's not here in this function, but it can be changed to letters, symbols, things like that. But it's definitely possible. So that's a footnote. Okay. And again, if you want multiple of these, you just have multiple tab footnote calls just by stringing them together. It doesn't matter what order they are in. They'll always arrange in the correct order. Okay, TabStyle. So similar to tab footnote in that it has locations for specifying where you want the change to occur. And it has a style argument this time. So you put one of these functions in there to specify what kind of style you want. Okay, best to show this. So I will show you with example again. I'll show you the unstyled table first. Great, so we have it down to this. Now what we're going to do is we're going to change the font of the entire body to Times New Roman. Okay. So Stell's body, it doesn't touch the column labels, but it touches all the body cells, which are all these down here. And we can do different things here. Cell's body takes arguments. We can do columns and do vars. For instance, if we run that, we'll just get that column being styled with Times New Roman text. Furthermore, we can do rows as well, and we can just specify, the first 3 rows, and see the first 3 rows get the styling of that column. Multi-page tables for outputs, RTF. Well, it does span over multiple pages, and the header is repeated if that's what you mean. I'm hoping that's what you mean, because that's currently what's supported, and that's it. Okay, awesome. Okay, so that was pretty underwhelming because it's only like Times New Roman. We basically did make the table look better, but there's tons of different things you can do. Let's actually play around with this just a bit more. Let's do CellFill, and we can see what's available in that. Color. Okay, so we do let's do blue. Okay, doesn't look great. For some reason, we can do green. Hopefully that's better. Okay, slightly better. So essentially, instead of using cell text, we can use CellFill. We could also do this, have a list, comma, and then cell text once more. And then we have a ton of options here. We can just do font again. I'm just choosing Times New Roman because I know it's a font that's available, and I know how it's spelled. But I think it proves the point. Make this run. There we go. So we're applying 2 different styles on one common location. Okay, next. So we can use a font from Google Fonts. We just have to use this helper function called Google_font. And we have a bunch of info functions. I'll get into that in the next module, but what you can do there is you get a table, actually. Let me show you that. So info Google Fonts, because it's hard to know the Google fonts. So this gives you some names. It's basically just a GT table. Gives you some names of some recommended ones because there's over 1,000 Google fonts. So I just provide some names. What you have to do when you use Google_font is provide this name right here. This gives you a bit of a specimen, And it actually helpfully tells you which size is available in both normal and italics. So that's pretty good. Great. So let me do that right here. We have a font name, IBM Plex Sans. We can give it a weight. These are sort of numbered weights that you see in that, in this info Google Fonts table. 400 is regular. Anything above that is bold. Anything under that is much lighter. So let's try this. Yeah, there it is. Now a dumb question from Sean. They only do work for HTML, just because like it's a web thing, essentially. What we could do is we can eventually get a way to download the font, but for the first crack of this, we just decided to like have it HTML only and essentially just link the style sheet over, and it just transmits the font over. So it's pretty magical. But yeah, it's HTML only. And we can change the weight. So you're going to see it nice and light. If that weight is available, yeah, it's much lighter. And we can go ultra bold with 800. Yeah, so that's changing the font with Google Font. And you can do that inside cell text. And you can do that inside TabStyle. It's a lot of functions. Okay, so use Zibble to create a GT table. So a bunch of styles. This is basically a bit more of a complete example. I'm showing kind of what I had before, where you have a list of styles with different functions. I'm basically doing it twice to two different columns of the table. Only difference here is for rows, I'm doing this conditionally. So I'm doing it for rows where the values in the num column are greater than or equal to 5,000. And here, where currency is less than 100. Let's have a look at that. Great. So a little hard to parse what's happening above and below, but essentially what I'm doing is I'm conditionally applying styles on different columns with two different columns of TabStyle. Yeah, good. So there's a giant table. It's an example data set called SP500. It's got a lot of rows, but we're filtering it down to just a few of those rows. And we're going to do the same sort of thing, conditional styling. So this is just another example of pretty much the same thing. I just thought I'd show you another use case of it. There we go. Great, so that's TabStyle. And what it does is you can style cells in different locations and target them and apply styles. Another thing we haven't shown, but it's possible, is adding borders. So let me just scroll back up. Sorry if I'm giving you a big vertical here, but yeah, cell borders, we haven't used it, but essentially you could specify, left, right, top, bottom borders and their thicknesses and so on. Okay, scroll back down. So the next function is tab options. It's a bit of a beast of a function. It has so many options. It's multiple page fulls. So if you use this, there's a help file for this and lots of examples in the help file. Obviously, a lot of these repeat. There's a few good ones in here. The ones which are really important, I pulled them out into a number of opt_ functions as shortcuts. So things like, setting outlines or, the sequence of glyphs for footnotes is in a separate function, a little easier. But an important one here is table width. You can use that, set the table to 100% or to some, width of pixels. It's pretty important. And there's a bunch of other ones here. So I'm going to demonstrate just a few of these. Yeah, because it's lots. So I'm going to take this table right here. I'm going to show you before and after. Well, actually, no. This is just creating the table. Common table, and then we're going to do a bunch of different things with options. So this one, we'll set the table width to 100%. Great. So it made it the entire width of the chunk output, which is great. So it didn't just size it to the to the largest size of each column. It's basically full width. Great. Scroll past this.
A couple of questions coming in, Rich, if you want to tackle them. Or...
Yeah, we'll do. So is there a way to use GT style functions to create a custom style and apply it to a table? You could. You just make a wrapper function. I don't have an example of it, unfortunately, but it's definitely possible. You just have to, it's a good thing for a vignette or article for this. So thanks for reminding me, Stefan. Yeah, but I just want to say it could be done without providing an example, but I know it could be done. How would you approach computationally validating the output rendering against the code? So that's kind of a tough one. What I've done in tests inside GT is use, XML, basically taking the table output, doing read XML, if that means anything to you, and then checking different nodes and then getting that as text and seeing if that is correct. So if you want to take a look and see how I do it, you can take a look inside the repo and look inside tests, test that, and eventually you'll get to some tests that have XML, using the XML2 package to get at those. Hope that answers your question. Okay, so another tab option or option from tab options is footnote.marks. So we can change the footnotes to letters. So here, instead of a 1, now we get an A. And if we had more footnotes, sorry, it's a little hard to scroll. We have two footnotes. We get them as A and B this time instead of 1 and 2. And we can also do this just while I'm here. We can also create our own set. We can do B and then A if we want to do something crazy like that. So now B, it follows a sequence, and then we have A next. So you can imagine any set of symbols you want can go in there. Okay, another thing we can do is if you find the tables a bit too tall, a bit too much space in each row, we can modify that. We take data row dot padding and use this pixels helper function and just say it's 5 pixels. A little hard to compare, but we can see that they're a bit, they're not as tall as before. You can fit more rows for the equivalent amount of space. Okay, here's 2 more options: heading dot title dot font dot size, and then the same with subtitle. So we can change it and have a bunch of different named sizes. These are all in the documentation, by the way. But essentially what we're doing here is we're making the header a bit smaller. Great, there's tons more. Read the docs for that. Sorry, I hate saying that, but it really there's a lot of stuff, and the documentation is not bad. And I wish I had more examples, but that would just take it's like an hour. To sum up, with these tab underscore functions, we can add a header with tab header, source notes with tab source note, spanner column labels with tab spanner, and you have a stub and you want a label above it, you can use tab underscore stub head. Footnotes are a bit more involved. You need to have location helper functions like cells underscore, but you can do that with tab footnote. Again, it doesn't matter what order you put them in. You have as many calls to tab footnote as you want. If you have multiple footnotes for a certain cell, it'll properly, order the numbers and put commas between them. Kind of like a journal. It'll do what a journal does. And if it doesn't, let me know, because we want to make sure it basically gives you the right footnotes. Tab styles for adding styles, and just so many options in the tab options function. So I have a question here. Is there a limit to the number of columns during rendering? No, there's no limit right now. There's no row limit or column limit. So you could definitely make something that's super huge. If you have something that's paginated, you can have too many columns and they become super small. So we don't say there's a limit. We might do that actually later on for rows at least, because you may render thousands upon thousands of rows and wonder what's going on. But currently there's no limits. It's kind of up to you, and use it with caution, I guess you can say.
Rich, earlier question about reading GT
RTF
back. Yeah, you kind of addressed it with the XML, but I think the question is more of reading the GT table directly and then make a data set out of it for QC.
Oh, so sorry. Yes, you can get the data set back from it. Okay, so here's two things. You put a data set into a GT table. You can use as data frame or as tibble and get the data set back as that object. If you add things like summary rows, like new data inside the body, you can also get that back. There's actually a separate function called extract summary rows. I think that's what it's called. I'm not showing it here, but anything you calculate inside GT can be extracted out because you create new data. Where does it go? You can pull it out and verify. The rest of the stuff, like labels, it's not really part of the data. It's like the surrounding Chrome, I guess, of a table. So you can't really, you can pull that stuff out if you work with the object, but it's not made incredibly easy, in other words.
Rich, I added back in a question that came in earlier. I think we may have missed, if you can see it in the chat box. Right at the bottom.
Other attributes. Custom class, ID, or data attribute. You could do something with CSS. So it's not really adding a custom class. Basically, we can affect the tag, like the tag itself. We can add stuff to a style tag with TabStyle. We can't add things right now, like row span or call span, which is a little unfortunate because I do want to add those in. So that's another thing that's coming. There's so many things to do with this package. It's still in its infancy, you can say. But those are things I definitely want, like having ways to target a range of cells and then span across, basically merge the cells. So we can't do that right now, but we can do a ton of stuff with CSS if you have an HTML output table. And I'll show that to you near the end of this workshop.
And I think, Rich, one of the big announcements of this workshop is the support for RTF. And I think there were a few questions or just comments about that. But I think the key takeaway is that that RTF support has been added, but it's currently in the dev version, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah. So if you're using this, this has actually got the dev version loaded up. That's why it works inside here. I actually did install GitHub inside this RStudio Cloud project. So yeah, okay. So that's all about module 2, which is dealing with these tab underscore functions. Next thing I want you to do, we have about 15 minutes or so. I've got this R&D called 02 practice. If you can, by yourselves, this is just a little bit of practice time. Take this file, run it, play with certain things, change things up. I don't want to talk too much here because I want to give you the time. But essentially use this file and experiment. That's what I want you to do. And we'll get back to module 3 at the top of the hour. And you can continue to ask me questions. I will definitely answer them. And you have my full attention.
Rich, I have a quick question, kind of a follow-up for Phil's question. Can we have a underlying kind of a template? Like for different pharma, we have the RTF specific template in the SaaS world, like a proc template to do it. Does it do it?
Yeah, so about that, we can craft a custom wrapper function that contains a bunch of styles, and you would just apply it like to the table object. You can make that as sophisticated as you want, like, conditional on different columns being there or not being there, or just, doing things like calling tab options or, whatever. So yeah, it's definitely possible. You have to do a bit of work in creating a function for that though. But if people want like a more specific templating function or set of functions to be available, let me know in the issues of this project. I'm definitely game for, understanding what people want in terms of, setting up templates and all that to make it easier.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. Tom just said templates would be incredibly useful. I agree. Yeah, essentially start a conversation inside GT, the repo, and an example of a template program. You mean like, well, Well, you mean like themes, possibly. Like themes are pretty close to templates, perhaps. I mean, that's in ggplot. So, and there's a whole ecosystem of themes. So there just needs to be like one set of examples. You know, it could be like things like adding new, there's lots of ways to extend GT, obviously. You can add new functions of each type and, you know, make that part of a package if you'd like. Or, you know, create custom functions that put together a number of these custom functions together.
And in footnotes, I think normally we put the link to the program itself
Oh, okay.
there.
Interesting. So that could be one thing that could be done. An automatic source note, for instance, which doesn't refer to any part of the table. And it just creates that note.
It's still part of the cell, not the footnote.
Oh, okay, got it. So,
Right.
So it is. So basically, that note would like be a real footnote, essentially.
Right.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, that could be done too. You know, I'd love to hear more inside the issues or how that could be done, or how that would be done.
Another thing is, Rich, normally in the Pharma TFL generation part, we read the titles, footnotes from an Excel file, normally cut the program index and make it into a macro to output it in the SaaS world. Like it will be part of the footnote, but it is
yeah. Well, for that, certainly you can create a wrapper function, or anything you put in here could be a function itself that evaluates, right? So if you have, you know, like the connection or what have you to that Excel file, you write a function that gets the title and inserts it right here. Basically, the output would be live right there.
Cool.
Yeah, this is really interesting to find out, because I want to hear these use cases, because, well, there might be something that GT doesn't make easy, or, you know, that's mostly it. Want to make it easier.
Yeah, there's a question about special character also.
Yeah, so we're mostly, oh, you mean like that. So if you're using Markdown, would that translate to like a superscripted 2?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, our common Markdown to HTML or Markdown to whatever library doesn't do that. It's a little bit sad. So no, you'd have to resort to like things like HTML. Possible footnote without an associated glyph. Yeah, you can have footnote options and just set, you know, like set the series of footnotes to like empty string. What does a G and GT mean? I guess grammar. we can vote on this. I left it open just to, you know, people have their own interpretation of it. I guess grammar. Well, let's call it grammar of tables. Let's keep it like that. I don't know. Any way to embed the raw HTML to get a Greek symbol? Yeah, I mean, you can use HTML entities. I believe there's things like that in there. Or you can use the Unicode code point to do that as well. And that's possible in all these places where it accepts text. I would just first wrap it in MD, so it understands that that's, you know, Markdown by way of, you know, using HTML. If you use MD, then any HTML will work as well. It'll just get passed through. Okay, we've got 5 more minutes before we continue. Definitely feed me questions. I'll answer them. Can we have, what is?
Continue.
Oh, when it goes to the next page. Well, it depends. Where do you want it? Do you want it on the top right? I guess that's usually where it goes, right? The header. You can do fancy stuff like use HTML create a span. Sorry if this is crazy. And then you basically right align the continued message. Although it's going to be impossible because it has to be paginated. So we'd have to know when to put that in. In the RTF, yeah, basically we can have that, but not yet. I have to build in that feature. Can you put that as an issue in the GT repo? It'd be super appreciated. It'll get essentially prioritized, and I won't forget it.
Right.
It's important to put the file issues.
This is something I think a lot about, Rich, because a lot of these types of feedbacks and comments get fed to me. And so it sounds like, for the pharma community, one of the best ways for them to directly communicate with the developers of these things, at Shiny as well, and the other teams, is to go to GitHub and put out these types of requests and issues and things like that.
Yeah, it's not a bad way. And and this is not unsurprising. Like I've seen some of the documents, and I guess I should have known, but I guess time limitations are what cause the feature to not be there. But that seems like an important one, putting like continuation text.
Mm-hmm.
No, Beth, I apologize. PDF is a little bit broken right now. It's always been a little bit low on features in terms of styling for LaTeX tables. We're hoping to get that in a better place in the coming months.
Rich, you might have covered it. I might have missed it. Did you say like we can put page number also, like say page 1 of the total?
No, unfortunately not. Not in the table itself. Yeah, but I'm sure that's a pretty standard, easy RTF thing to include. So that'll be sort of like the thing I do when I work on RTF next, which should basically continue. Thomas, it's okay. I will get it in. Have faith. And it would be definitely useful. I mean, like just knowing that table continues, but you don't know how many or how much it'll continue is not great.
I get the sense, Rich, that around RTF, people need like a big fat, like, we're declaring that RTF is now supported, because I see a comment here. It's like, so does this mean all available GT features are now available in the RTF format as well? And so yeah, that's a yes, right, Rich?
Well, almost.
Almost.
Some things, yeah. See, some things are not supported yet, but we plan to work on it in the next, before we really make a major release. We're going to do a few more things to the dev branch to get RTF in a much better place. Things like setting column widths, that's not yet implemented. That whole thing with the header and pagination, I mean, it repeats, but it doesn't say much, so it doesn't have that yet. So that's a thing to do as well.
Good.
Yeah.
Awesome. So it sounds like, the core functionality is there. It's going to be in the CRAN release soon, I suspect. And there's a few added things that we're going to add to RTF. And then there's anything specifically needed that's more niche to pharma. The best way for people to add feedback is through GitHub directly into, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a thing I'll be working on for the next little while. So it basically has my highest priority. Like
awesome, man.
Finishing up the RTF essentially. But I didn't want to delay it any further. I wanted to get it out at least in, if not in complete form, in some usable form. So that's why it is the way it is, I guess.
Yeah, and just commenting, from a funny perspective, is Sean Lacey is talking about RTF code, and it's been a tricky thing. I mean, you go to some of these, some of the top developers in the world, and you say, we need you to work on a legacy format from 30 years ago. It's a tricky thing, but Rich was amazing at tackling this. So. Yeah,
the thing with RTF is you can't even get the most recent version of the spec. It's like lost in some dusty area of the Microsoft website. It's basically, so you can't get that. The latest one you can get is like a few versions earlier. I think in 2003 or maybe 2008.
Yeah.
I don't know. But anyways, it's not easy, but it's rewarding though, because, we need to have RTF support. And very few table making packages really built that out. Snooping figures, yes, that's a new thing. Oh, for scientific numbers, no. So we have that in format number, which I'll show you in the next, well, I should begin onto that now. So there's an n_sig_fig argument, but that's not currently in scientific numbers yet. It's just in format number. Unless I'm misremembering, let me find out about that. Format scientific will be the second one. No, sorry about that. Add an issue. If you add an issue on GitHub, it's a good practice to do, adding issues. Just say that the n_sig_fig argument, which is right here, is needed for format scientific. And then I'll get that in there.
Rich is probably sitting there like, yeah, I regret that.
This package is so incredibly deficient. No, it's okay. It's okay. I mean, this is exactly what I want. I want to know what people need. So if you don't know, then you'll just never get implemented. So
right,
better to know. Okay. Split by functionality. Let's say you have two treatment arms. I want the first level header, the treatment, and the second level header by sex. No, not currently. That's not in there. Again, I would say file an issue. Clone Rich. I mean, yeah, it is just me working on this. So. And this RTF feature has taken a bit of time. I mean, totally worth it, but we basically need more contributors to GT.
Yeah. Have you talked to Taurus Research and combined the efforts with their Pharma RTF effort?
Yeah,
that would be good. That'd be really good.
There's Iannone at Merck also has a R2 at RTF package. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see the mix of those packages with GT. I mean, because everybody, I don't think wants to manage multiple separate packages for the same thing. So we're trying to figure that piece out as well. Or are there, is there a good fit for those packages and this? And it's a big ecosystem. So it's a good comment to mention. So.
Yeah, definitely more discussions would help. It would essentially push the effort forward quite a bit, I think. Yeah. Oh, and there's a question here about decimal alignment. That's the thing I desperately want to get in. But it's not there yet because of competing priorities again. But it's something that's definitely on the roadmap, the unofficial roadmap, you can say. And I've got some pretty good strategies for doing decimal alignment with spaces and such.
Not to mention your other packages too, Rich, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, like there's I've got another package which actually uses GT to create tables. So I'm just saying, like, you can use GT not just for making tables, but for if you have a package that outputs something tabular, why not, use GT to, make it nice. So I'm just saying that the possibility is there. So that's my shout out to using GT in other packages.
Oh, I was just meaning you maintain other packages like the validation.
Yeah, that's true. But my major focus is probably going to be GT for the next. Other packages have languished, essentially. That said, we should move on to the next module, which is number 3. It's all about formatting data. So the functions we'll use, there's a lot, but they all begin with FMT. We'll call these functions formatters. There's also another one which is a bit of a wild card called data color. It's also similar, but different enough. And there's a number of associated information functions. Essentially, they just spit out a table, and they give you some pertinent information about things you need. It could be about formats, well, I'll show you that anyways. And these functions are pretty big. Like format number has a lot of options, but the idea behind it is that you can get your number or numbers really formatted exactly the way you want it. So for instance, we can specify, the columns to format. We can select a subset of rows, and then we can choose the exact number of decimals, sort of a constant number of decimals. We can defer to using significant figures and provide a number there. We can do things like drop the trailing zeros or drop the and we can use value separators. Those are essentially commas or periods to separate groups of 3 digits on the big side. We can scale numbers. So this is essentially a multiplier. We can do, okay. There's so many things. We also add a pattern and wrap some text around the number, the X being the final formatted number. We can change our decimal marks, or we can use a locale to format numbers according to some specified locale code. So let's get through a bunch of these. And luckily, most of these formatters have the same interface. They all take data. They have columns and rows. Some of the options are common, some are a bit different, but they make sense for the type of formatter that they are. So let's make a GT table and just format the num column in Exibel using format number with the default options. So we're just specifying the column to format. So I'm going to run this. And we see instead of getting what we got before, which is basically the light formatting, which is done by R, which gives us this sort of like machine scientific notation. It gives us this because we specified the defaults. The default number of decimal places is constantly 2. NAs are ignored. They're just kept as NAs. And we get that all the way down the column. So 2 decimal places. And we get these separators, so commas here, which you can set to false to exclude them. So great. So if you don't want to use the digit separators, use seps equals false. Let's take a look at that. There we go. This time we used 3 decimal places, but we don't have any separators here at all. No commas. So say you only want the first three rows of num, this time at 4 decimal places. We can use rows and just specify the range of rows. So here we go. So we use decimal 4s just to show the difference here. It's definitely the first 3 rows only. Okay. Good. Okay, so next. So we're going to do something conditional. We've done this before, but now we can see that it can be done in format number as well. So we're setting rows to be conditional on the currency column having values greater than 30. Okay, so let's run that. And we see 4 decimal places over here on the left side. There we go. So there's the 4 decimal places, yeah, where they count. So these are the formatted numbers, and these are not formatted because the condition is not satisfied based on the currency value. Good. Okay. Okay. So we do much more than that. We can put, we can specify a pattern and say this is the final formatted number. We're going to add a k to the right of it, and we're going to scale the values to be 1,000th of what they normally are. And we're going to just choose the rows where the number is greater than 500. So I'm going to run that. Tom asked, can you apply conditional formatting multiple times within a table? Yes, you can, but for all formatters, the last one wins. So if you format on the same cells in a later call, that one will take priority. Essentially, that one will win, essentially. So for this one, we have, the last 3 rows, or last 4 actually, have that pattern. They're scaled, and they have the k added to the right of them. And we don't see, we only have the num column. So, and we're actually using the condition on the same column that we're formatting. Great. So example was a bit of a boring data set. We've got a bunch of other ones. Let's use country pops. And what we'll do is I'll show you the table we make just from a set of dplyr and tidyr calls. Very untidy, but pretty good for tables. We essentially have a bunch of years and some different country codes here and population figures, those different years. So let's make a GT table from that. So we get that. Pretty good, but giant numbers. We do want to format these down. So one crazy thing we can do is we can use this suffixing argument and specify that as true. What that will do is it'll just say, it'll automatically scale and add suffixes for these large figures. So now we have values in terms of millions and in billions, wherever it's suitable for that. So that's what that does. Oh, another little trick here. You can also format columns. You can specify them by index range. The 2 is this because the first column here was the country code 3. So these columns always refer to the data set that was passed in. Right. Okay, so let's do something a little bit different here. We'll use a locale for number formatting. So we can do that with a locale argument. We can specify a code. This could be FR for France. And we can have these sort of like, these sublocales, sort of basically this is France, but French. Sorry, it's the opposite way around. This is French and France, which is what this is. It's always the biggest country or the largest population is the base locale. Or it could be French in Canada, or it could be German, or it could be German in Austria. So let's take a look at a few of these. So this is number formatting. See, we get commas in place of what used to be decimals and spaces where there used to be commas. So we change that to, say, DE. We get this. We get periods for those large number separators and commas for the rest. If you want to do Austria, similar, but we get a sort of like a small space instead. So essentially, there's tons and tons of locales supported in GT and you can set the locales sort of on a per column, per formatting level basis. So you don't have to set a locale for the entire table. You can format, just very specifically in one part with a locale. And if you need to know more about locales, they're all in here, info locales. Kind of a big table, so it's going to take a second to run. You can trim down the number of locales too there's an option here to say starting with a letter. But while that runs, I'll answer a question or two. Can you specify the cell content in the table body in rows containing row group header? Let's see if I understand. e.g. to include total of each row group by column. Try to understand this. I actually don't know. Yeah, if you could do that, that'd be great, because somehow I just can't parse that. But definitely ask again when you have an example. So locales, there's lots of locales. I think nearly 800 supported in GT. So you can put any of these codes in, and you should get numbers formatted just like it is in this preview right here, which is cool. And a lot of these functions have locales, so that's pretty good. So Format Scientific has that as well. So Format Scientific, if you want scientific values or scientific notation in your numeric values, you can do that with this function. Sorry about that. It has similar sort of arguments. It's a little bit trimmed down. We just have decimals as the main one and drop trailing zeros. And we still have the other arguments like scaling by and using a pattern. So let's show you an example of that. So we have something where we format it as a number, and we have another column, the num column, formatted as scientific, just in a few rows actually. So let's have a take a look at that. There it is right there. So num column is scientific notation. This is included as well, but it's not given in scientific notation because Otherwise, we'd have a 10 to the 0, which would be, not as nice to show. So by default, it never shows 10 to the power of 0 or 10 naught. So that's how that works. Not much more to say there beyond that, but that's helpful if you need scientific notation numbers. So percent values. So definitely useful if you have fractional values and you want to display them with percent sign. So let's do that with this pizza place data set. We'll trim that down, make a table like so. I'll show you the table before formatting. So now we have a fractional value right there. So we'll convert these to percentages. So let's do that right now with the rest of this statement. There we go. So now we have it formatted as percentage values. So if you already have them like scaled to percentages, you could use another option here called scale values. So by default, it's true. It assumes you have fractional values. But you set this to false. It'll just add the percent sign. And that way you're saying that it's already in percentage values. Like just add a percent sign. So you do that with scale values. Great. Next one, format currency. So you have some currency values. You want to make them appear like currency values. So the main thing that I take away from here is you just need a currency code. By default, it's USD. But this could be, basically any currency code that exists. And it'll automatically put the right amount of subunits. It'll put the right currency symbol in place. It'll try to do the right thing. Otherwise, you could, make those options. You could basically add decimals and, take that responsibility on yourself. But for what it does is good because you just specify the currency, give the column, perhaps some rows, and it should do the right thing. So here we are, currency, now it's in euros, which is great. And 2 decimal places. There's actually a few currencies that have more than 2. They're pretty rare, but sometimes there's 3 or 4. So let's do that again. We can have multiple different currencies. I just want to show you that it works, and you can do it on multiple columns. So here it is again, with 2 different types of currency on 2 different columns. So there we have yuan, and then we have pounds. Great. Now dates. So if you have a column full of dates or whatnot, you format them with format date. It uses date styles, sort of numbered styles, and you can get all of these, like what the date styles mean, by using the info date style function. That gives you like a table of different numbers and how they correspond to different styles of dates. So they either take a date object or they take character values that can be parsed as dates. So basically they're an ISO notation. So let me show you that. So these dates are actually date values. And I'll format it with date style 5. Pretty good. We do date style 2, just show you the difference. Good, and you'll see all these in info date style. I believe it goes up to 7, but I'll just try 6 there. Missing dates, they're just NAs. Okay, so here's another one with date and time columns. We can format the date column to have mixed date formats. Dates after April will be different than the others. So let's take a look at this. So we can actually do its row condition and just use as date and then make a comparison. And we'll see we'll have 2 different date styles, styles 6 and 7. It's a little bit odd, but it just proves the point that you can mix together, conditional rows in different date styles. So there we go. We have the day number before the month, and then we have it reversed. Great. Unfortunately, we don't have this in the package. We don't have locale for format date and time. That's something I definitely want to work on in the future. It's a little bit low priority compared to the other things. But it'd be nice to have, you just put in locale and it gives you the date according to the locale in the correct language. And that sort of thing. Times, you can also format times. So it doesn't currently use anything but character strings. As long as they're formatted according to ISO 8601, like this, they'll be parsed and they'll be transformed to the time style that you want. So we actually have a time column in Exibel. Exibel has everything. So we'll take format time and apply time style 3, and we'll play around with the different time styles. So you can see. So there it is with 12-hour time, AM and PM indicators. We do this. That's just 24-hour time. 4. About the same. Let's try 5. Yeah, sort of like truncates a bit. It just gives you the hour. So as you go further on, you get like, sort of like more truncated versions of the time. And if you just go back to 1, it'll essentially give you back what you already have, ISO notation. So yeah, that's it. NAs are basically ignored. They're kept as NAs. So yeah, I'll show you a bit more about how you can deal with NAs later on. Here's another example. Again, uses conditions. But this actually works. We can say time greater than this string because it's actually doing alpha sorting. Works well for 24-hour time. And we need to have that to actually even just parse this with format time anyways. So this actually works. So we do comparisons on strings. There you go. We format it differently depending on some comparison. Okay, date time. So basically it's combining together the date and the time. You provide a date style, maybe a different time style. These are meant to match together. So 1 and 1 go well with 2 and 2, 3 and 3, and so forth, for the most part. And essentially we need a string or a date, a POSIX column. If you have POSIX CT, that works perfectly, nothing more to do. But if you have a string, it has to conform to this format, so it's parsable. And here we go. I'll just show you how this looks. So we got a column called date time. Let's use format date time to make a date and time. There we go. We may do this as well. There you go. Yeah, and there's lots of combinations of that. But if you ever need to make a date and time together, this is one good way to do it. Format markdown. So you may have a table that has lots of text in it, and that's not totally uncommon. You may have, list items, that sort of thing. We can use format markdown, and it'll take that text inside of your table and format as markdown. So let's take a bunch of different text snippets here. So we have text 1A, 1B. We're going to piece that together using Tribble to make a table, which will look like this. Great. We'll pass into GT. If it's just GT by itself, it'll just show you the raw text, no transformation. But after transformation, it is as markdown. So that's great. So we have list items, things are bold, we have headers, links. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. So it works through Common Mark, the R package. So it does a very good job at translating the markdown text to actual markdown. Okay, so you saw before a number of tables had NA values. A little bit ugly inside of a table, they have NA values. So this function format missing will replace those NA values with any text you want. You target where you want the replacement to occur, and you can replace it. This triple dash shorthand becomes an M dash, which is a long dash. You can put 2 dashes, it becomes an N dash. It's a little convenience. But the default is to put an M dash, which is a long dash. So looking at this table right here, we do have NAs in it, right there. So columns 1 and 2 will replace the missing text with the word missing. And columns 4 to 7 will replace the missing text with nothing. Slightly ridiculous, but it'll show us that it is replaced. There we go. It's good. So and I want to show you the default case where you don't put anything in. we just get these long dashes, which are M dashes. Great. So yeah, you can definitely, and this has a different rule. If you use format missing, you can just do everything. It'll just essentially take what is NA. It won't try to reformat anything that's a value or anything like that. It'll just safely pass over NAs and replace them in the columns you specify. So you can do something like, everything. And then just skip this. And then just have everything replaced with the M dash. Okay, this is kind of a big one, data color. It's only big because it's got a lot of parts to it, and it's a little bit hard to understand. Thankfully, there's examples here and also in the documentation. But the idea of a data color is you take, well, either numerical or even text values, and you add colors to them. You can use a palette or a color function. So what you use is color functions from the scales package. That's usually the best way to do it. I'll show you some examples of those. And you need to provide a palette, the colors really. And a good way to do that is with a palette that you know, or you can use something like the Paletteer package, which comes bundled with a ton of themed palettes from all sorts of R packages that just provide palettes. So here's an example. I'm going to show you step by step what we get coming in. So we got these population figures for Mongolia from the years 2008 to 2017. And we got these population values right here. Okay, so we're going to take these population values and add colors to them. So we do have a data color. We're specifying the column called population. And we're going to use the function scales call numeric. Okay, so what it'll do is it'll essentially take the colors red, orange, green, and blue in that order and apply a gradient across a domain of 200,000 to 400,000. Okay, so let's just see what that looks like. It'll make much more sense once you see it. There we are. So we don't see a bunch of red because we're way past that part in this, in the range here. We're actually getting to orange, and then we're moving towards green, and we don't actually quite get the blue because that's the domain is actually pretty, well beyond, where blue is. Sort of think of this as like, like cut points right here. This is the beginning, and some way in, and this is the last one, I suppose. And we use a number of different functions here. It's not just call numeric, but there's also call factor or call quantile. Let's try call quantile. And see right here, it's basically just using the orange and green. That's where it is when it's cut into quantiles. Or quartiles, really. Okay, I was getting confused. Okay, so that's data color. What we need is examples. So here's another one of them. Let me show you this table using pizza place. I'll show you what it looks like pre-data color. Looks like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to color in the both the sold and the income columns because they're both numerical values. We're going to use call numeric. And this time we're going to use the palette, which is from Paletteer. Sorry, this is all wrapped around, but if you take this entire thing and just run that, this is our color palette from that. It's basically taken from the GGSci package, and the palette itself is called red material. Okay, so let's run this whole thing. There we go. So in this one, we didn't specify domain. So the domain is actually just the range of values, like the top and bottom for each of these two sets. Sets being the different columns of values. And it's just essentially applying the red material values. Another trick you can do is you can reverse the palette, like so. And if my theory is correct, it should reverse the way it's applied as well. Great. That's data color. So that's the end of module 3. I'll just wrap up what that was all about. Basically, it's about formatter functions. We got format number to do numbers, scientific notation with format scientific, percentages with format percent, and currency values with the currency one. There's lots of options, as you can see. Using locales, you can scale values, apply a pattern. We can do dates and times, date times, markdown text with format markdown, missing values with format missing, and what we just saw, data color is for applying color to different cells. There's also an info palettier function, which gives you all the different color palettes inside palettier as a giant GT table. I'll show it to you later because it's kind of a big one. Okay, so that's that module. Any questions about the formatters? I know I'm just getting a study stream of them, but if you have anything that's pressing right now.
Hey, Rich, just, we're at the 2:30 mark, which is, looks like it's almost halfway. What about taking a 5-minute break, let people stretch their legs, grab a bathroom break if they need to, and then we'll come back and pick up from here. Is that okay?
Sounds great.
Awesome. I've got a timer on my end, but if you want to put something up or just leave your screen up, that's fine. And I'll just, just tell everybody to be back here at 2:36 or so.
2:36.
2:36. All right. Yeah. See everyone in 5 minutes.
All right. All right. So module 4, modifying columns. So for this one, it's all about using the calls functions, calls underscore. So these functions work by acting on entire columns, and you can do useful things like aligning text values within them, labeling the columns themselves, like the column labels, changing the widths of columns, which is a confusing but sometimes necessary thing to do. Moving columns around. If you didn't do that, before you brought the table in, you have a second chance with calls move. You can hide certain columns from view with calls hide. And we do all sorts of we can do all sorts of merging things with columns. We can take 2 columns or even more, sort of bring them together, almost like a mutate, take the content, sort of post formatting, then bring them together and apply a pattern to how to merge these values together. And we'll see at the end of this module how to do that. But first we'll get to a pretty boring one, calls align. What GT does for you automatically is align the columns for you automatically based on the content. But if you want to change that, you can do that with calls align. You just choose the columns you want to be aligned and you choose the alignment. So let me show you that quickly. So I'll show you the sort of automatic alignment of this table. So it looks like the numeric values are right aligned and the character ones are left. So you want to left align the population value, we can do that. It's a little bit hard to see because the column width is not that wide, but you can see it though. So it's now left aligned. Okay. Good. So the option is there if you need it. You can align columns. We can label columns. So what are row labels? So we have row names, column names. We also have column labels. So when a table comes into GT, we're using the column names as column labels. But we could also choose a different label, maybe even using Markdown or HTML to define the way the label looks. So essentially, we're replacing the label. And so what you do is in calls label, you give like this list, set of arguments of the column name. That's the incoming data table column name. And then the label you want to apply. So let's show you. Let's take a look at this. Name your population. Before that change, it was like this. So it presents a bit better if you do this, obviously. And that's why this feature is there. So that prevents you from having to give your actual data, with dplyr or your data table coming into GT, funny names and using backticks and all that to use spaces. You just do this. And again, like I said, we can use Markdown and we could, for instance, make all these column labels bold, like that. Good. That's pretty much all there is to that. If you want to reference any of these columns, you always do it by this, like the original column name coming in. we don't use these labels if they're changed to reference the columns themselves. Okay. GT does not pick up the label attribute of a column. It doesn't do anything cool like that. I mean, I do want to be a bit more intelligent, like later on, taking features like even units or things like that in certain columns. But currently it does not do that. It's pretty low tech at the moment. It just takes in the column name. So calls width. So you can set the widths of columns with this. It's got a bit of a confusing signature, but it's kind of the same as the earlier one, where you just provide in. Well, it's not the same. We have to show this to you. It's a bit more confusing. So what you do here is we have this table over here. You can make a GT table, and we're not satisfied with the way it's laid out in terms of the width of each column. So we want to change them. So we can specify with select helpers what the columns are, and then what the pixel values, like what the widths actually are. We can do ends with and select the columns like char. Well, it's only char in this case. Starts with date, that would select these two. And then we give them pixel values. And then the rest we can specify to true and say the rest of the columns would be 60 pixels wide. So let's take a look at that. Great. Great, great, great. So we set those in pixels. We can also do things like %. But beware, that's where it gets a bit confusing. It'll just do what HTML tables do. And in the exercises section, I have a link that shows every possible combination of using pixels, %, and even like tab options, table width. You can set that to be 100%, for instance. And it will have effect on column widths. Right there. See, it'll be a bit different. You can say, easily %25. If you go above 100%, it will essentially normalize for you and do things like that. But you can have a mixture of percentages, pixels, what have you. It'll do weird things. One thing to notice, if you want things to be super exact, you can specify pixels for each one of these, and it will honor that. So you can have these impossibly small. The content will spill out, but it gives you that level of control if you need it. It's kind of weird, but you may have a column which just has a fill and no text, and you may want to have it super small. So you can do it that way. Okay. I know it's odd, but you can do it. Okay. Calls move. So you want to move one or more columns into different locations. You can do that with calls move. So interface is pretty simple. You select the columns you want to move. You specify which column you want to move after. Okay, so let's try that. So say we have this table over here. Okay, it's running. So it's this table. It has columns in the order of country name, year, and population. That's the entire table. But we don't want that. We want population to be after a country name. So we want to go over here. So let's actually run this statement and move it on over. There it goes. So, I mean, you can do this beforehand, but if you don't want to modify your data set coming in, you can always move columns around, sort of touch things up with calls move. And sometimes it's important to use calls move because sometimes you'll have things like tab spanner, which will rearrange your columns, and you can counteract that with calls move. So it's useful in a few ways. Calls hide, so you can hide one or more columns. So instead of moving it, you're just disappearing a column. It won't show up. And importantly, if there's a footnote on any of the data in that column, it could be like the column label, or it could be the data underneath. It will essentially skip that footnote, and it'll number things. It'll renumber things properly. So that's an important sort of note. It'll do that for you. It'll handle footnotes properly. So say we have this table here. It has a bunch of columns we don't need. We have country name. We don't need country code 2. We don't need country code 3. So let's just hide them. There you go. Now they're gone. So you may ask, why include, columns if you're just going to hide them later? Well, those columns might be useful. You might use them in conditional statements where you need some data from a different column, and you're using that for some other column, but you don't want to show the column that you used in that other work column, I guess. So you can always just hide them in the end, but still use them in the API. And another important note is you can hide them at any point. You can hide them before using the actual column for a conditional statement. And it kind of goes for a lot of the API. The order you put the statements in doesn't matter so much, except for the formatters, where like the next, like the most recent formatter wins if it's overlapping on some certain locations. For the most part, order doesn't matter. Okay, so we got another one here. This is basically proving the point that you could use the population column and then hide it, but we have the calls hide beforehand. Okay, so let's see if that works. Okay, so indeed we have population above 3 million there. Footnotes applied to these two rows. We don't have the population column anymore. It's been wiped out. Same with country code 3, that's also gone. But yeah, we still have this, which is good. So you don't have to worry too much about the order, but sometimes you need columns, but you don't need them in the actual output. So that's what calls hide does. Okay, calls merge range. So this is all, what this does is it merges two columns to a value range column. So we have a general calls merge function and two very specific ones. The specific one, this is one of the specific ones, calls merge range. We also have calls merge unsert for uncertainty values. Let's show you this one first. What it does is it creates a range for you. So it'll do something like this. It'll take two columns of values, or it can even be text, just puts them together and puts a long dash between them. And what it'll do is it'll automatically drop call end. It'll essentially merge it to one column by automatically hiding the second one. And you can turn that off by specifying auto hide equals false. So it won't actually run calls hide for you. So let's actually take a look at that in action. So let's just run the table, the before version, where we have these models of cars, MPG-C and MPG-H. We want to put these together into one column, with 11-18. So let's do that. We'll do that right here. I'm just going to go one more step. And what we get in the end is MPG-C. MPG-H is hidden, but MPG-C has been changed to this. So it has the values from MPG-H in it, which is great. And we may not want this label anymore. It may have a different meaning now that it has a range. So we can separately label that like this, with the calls label. Great, because that column is still there. It's not hidden, MPG-C. Great, so that's how you use calls merge range. Something very similar is calls merge unsert. So one value is one column contains the values, another column contains the uncertainty values. The separator between them could be set. This is a plus or minus with a space on each side. This will actually be transformed to a proper plus minus sign like this. And if you really want it like that, you can do this. I don't know why you would, but it's possible. You can have a literal string like that, but this one will be transformed if it's in this very specific string. It's got the same auto hide option where it'll take the call unsert column and hide that. And let's take a look at that. So again, we'll do before and after because I think it's pretty instructive. So we have a currency and we have some, no, it's a little bit silly because it doesn't make any sense, but this is what we have from example. We're going to make this the value and this the uncertainty. So let's actually just run this whole thing. There we go. So an important thing also what it does is if it doesn't have an uncertainty value, it's NA, it'll just show the value. If the value itself is NA and there's some uncertainty value or not, it'll just be NA. So it'll collapse to NAs in some way that makes sense. Okay, so that's calls merge unsert. Okay, and now here's a general calls merge function. So merge data from 2 or more columns to a single column. So in this one, we can specify multiple columns and then create a pattern. There's a pattern already sort of created for you in the function itself. A little bit strange to have a paste statement as a value for, but it's pretty convenient though. What this will do is it'll essentially paste them all together with spaces between them. But usually that's not what you want. We can change that. And it'll hide any columns except for the first specified column in columns right here. So let me just show you that. So let's take a look at the before table here. So we have date, open, high, load, close. What we want to do is we want to merge together the open and close columns, and then the low and the high columns. The pattern will be open being 1, fitting it right there, close being 2, and essentially a simple hyphen between them. Let's actually change that just so we can sort of see the difference between these 2 different calls merge statements. And then we're going to relabel open and low so it reflects what we actually have in there. So let's run that. Nice, okay. So yeah, now we have 2 columns from 4 and merged values. And the cool thing about this is we can even take format number and format the number that's going in. So it could be bars, I guess, open. And we'll do decimals 5, just so we can see it. And then we'll add that in the pipe. And we'll see that the actual formatted value is part of that now. See, so the merging happens after the formatting, which is useful because you can format these differently and then merge them together in some particular way. So that's calls merge. And that covers all the calls underscore functions I want to go over in this module. So just to recap, calls align for alignment, calls label for labeling the columns for using a new label, maybe the one you want in column labels. Using calls width to specify the widths of columns. Calls move to move columns around, hiding them with calls hide. Ranged values with calls merge range. Uncertainty values with calls merge uncert. And finally, anything you want, how you want it to merge with calls merge and some sort of pattern. And you can keep going with as many columns as you specify. Yeah, so those are the calls functions. They allow you to modify different columns. And, oh, we have very little time for practice. Sorry about that. But we'll take another, let's say another 10-minute break because the next 2 modules after this are a bit on the shorter side. The main stuff was in the beginning. It's kind of front-loaded, this whole workshop. But I do want you to have a look at this. I'll answer questions for the next 10 minutes. And this worksheet, this practice sheet, you can play around with formatting, exposing all the values here. You can just mess around with this. Same with this one right here. And the other things you do, there's a link. If you really need it, there's a link here to how column widths are actually determined. Yeah, so we'll take a 10 and I'll answer questions during that time.
Awesome. All right, it's 2:57, so I guess we'll be back here in 10 minutes. And take a look at that file in RStudio Cloud. And if you need access or if you join late and you don't have it, just let me know and I can give you a link, or I can even just post it in the chat.
Oh, sorry, the file is just a GitHub file.
Oh, is it just a GitHub
file?
file?
Yeah, it's just linking to a test in our script, but.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay, yeah. Maybe just put that in the chat box. Is that okay?
Yes, we'll do.
Okay, yeah, got it. I thought you were talking about the actual for practice file. Okay, perfect, perfect. So you just want people to take that and then bring it over to cloud, or just play with it? And
no, this is like a reference for the future. Say you're really confused about all the interactions that happens with column widths. It's very confusing. So I laid out every possible combination in a file with some explanations and runnable examples.
Yeah. All righty. See everybody back here about 3:08 or so.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, great. So the next module is all about summary rows and something called grand summary rows. So the way this works is summary rows can work on different groups that you specify on the table when you have row groups. And the grand summary rows, they operate on the entire data set. So they would appear at the bottom of the table in its own special section, sort of like set off from the rest. So you know it's a grand summary. So there's two functions I discussed in this module. They're both kind of tough to use, and I apologize for that. But if you have a good example, as there is in the example articles for summary rows and grand summary rows, you can go from there each time. The reason why it's a bit difficult is because you have to provide your own functions, your own aggregation functions, really. And you'd even like specify a formatter in maybe a kind of strange way. So let me just show you how this works. For the first one, summary rows, we're going to work on groups. So just to remind you, we'll take example and create groups. So we have two groups, group A and group B. And certainly we have numerical values and we have all sorts of values in each group. And they're different. So we can work on making summary rows, which will slot onto the bottom of each group. So right before like this column label and after row 4 and row 8 in this one. So, so we specify the row groups, we give them their names. In this case, we're doing group A and group B. This could just be group A. So we can also just select one group or both groups. We can also use true, and that targets all groups if you don't want to type in all the names. And certainly when we calculate summaries, we're doing it on a column by column basis because we have different types of values. So the functions you supply will be different and maybe not relevant or not needed for different columns. So for this call, we're going to use summary rows, both groups. We're going to create summary items for the num column right here. And what we'll do is we'll calculate sums. So we do that by enclosing some functions in this functions argument in a list. We give it the name. This will become the row label, the summary row label. It will fit into the stub. And then we give the function we're going to use. The dot being the values we're going to aggregate. We got to put the tilde in because we're supplying this as a one-sided R formula. So the function on the right side. So let's just run this. And we'll see that we have the sum row. So we have the sum of these values here, and we have a different sum right here. So it's basically adding up these values and creating the label on the side. For the rest, the stuff that we didn't supply that summaries for, we have a missing value label. And we can change that. We can use missing text. And we can say, we can have just an empty string if you want. Run that and see it's empty all the way across. Which in many cases might be preferred. But the default is to put the M dashes in. Okay, so that's one example, the sort of minimal example. We'll move on to another example, which is a bit more complicated. So we can have formatting done first to the table. So what we've done is we formatted values here before putting in summary rows. So we have one decimal place and we have some grouping separators. Now what we want to do is we want to add summary rows. Okay, so we'll do it on all groups, again on the column which is num. This time we'll put in a few different summary rows, sum, min, and max. They all operate kind of the same way. We're all choosing to use na.rm equals true. That will skip over. It'll give you a value when there's an na value. It'll basically skip over those, remove those. And what we're doing here is we're using a formatter, and in separate statements, we're providing the arguments and the values. We can have as many of those as we want. We can have, well, they don't show us them there, but it could be use seps, I believe is one of those. It could be false. Okay, so let's run this. Sorry, I'm going to scroll down and see. Sorry, hard time scrolling. There we go. Now we have sum, min, max. For this one, we don't have separators. We specified use steps equals false. We specified the way it would be formatted in the end. And now we have 3 summary rows. So that's kind of good. And the cool thing is, and I hope I have an example of this below. I do, which is good. We could use the same rows for multiple different types of summaries across different columns. So essentially, you can reuse the summary labels. So a sum, for instance, of just a numeric value and a sum of some currency value, for instance. Let's see how that works. Okay, so we have one statement here, example, making a GT table with groups and a stub. We're formatting the values in num, and we're creating summary rows for the num column. And we're doing that in a second statement for the currency values. We're kind of using the same, it's more or less the same statement, just replacing. Okay, so now we have the same rows are being reused for this summary for this column and this summary for this column. So essentially it's the same summary, only because we use the same values of sum, min, max, the same labels. Oh, I'm hearing that I'm having audio difficulties. Am I okay now? Good, thank you, sorry. Yeah, I did get a message saying the internet connection was unstable. Thankfully, it wasn't too long. So that's how you add multiple of these. And you can do this for as many columns as you want. It'll reuse labels, so you don't have to make more rows for redundant sort of summaries. But as soon as you change it, like to total, it will do that thing. There, essentially a new row is being made because it's not overlapping with the other one that you made there. Okay, which is undesirable. So if you have similar, you want things to be on similar rows, you should use similar labels or the same labels. So here's one using SP500 for making a GT table with row groups. Summary rows, min, max, and average by row group, where each row group is a week number. So I'm doing some fancy stuff here. Essentially, just take a look at it. We're using a bit of mutate to create week numbers, which are here. And these will be the groups. So group name call is going to be week. So now we have week 02, week 03, sort of ISO weeks. Not great. I mean, that's not the whole story, really. Now we're going to use that to make summary rows. And see, now we get the summary rows we want. And because we use currency all the way down, and we're specifying the currency in the summary rows function call right here from a currency, using the defaults, it just so happens that it's formatted exactly the same. We don't have to provide any more arguments for that because we specified the currency in both cases. Well, actually, no, we didn't here, but the default is in USD. Okay, so that's summary rows. And we have this other function, which is grand summary rows. Works kind of the same way, except it works across all data, but still, the only thing missing from the function signature is groups, because we no longer have to specify the groups, because we're working not with groups, but within all the data in a table. Another good thing to note is that we can mix calls of summary rows with grand summary rows and have group-wise summaries and also grand summaries at the same time. Okay, so I'll show you an example of that. This is the same example of using SP500 and creating the week numbers. The only thing different here is this call now is the call to grand summary rows. Okay, we're specifying open, high, low, close, which are the dollar figures, and then we're specifying a bunch of aggregation functions. We could do this if you want, doesn't matter if you do or don't. And we're not putting NARM in here. It's sometimes a little bit dangerous if you don't do that. But in this case, we know we don't have any NA values. Okay. we go. Scroll down. So there's group 2, top of tables here. Group 3 is there. Just scroll here. And this is the grand numbers. So the difference here is the aggregate values are taken across both groups. And we have this double line here, which sets it off as a grand summary row. And certainly you can change your labels to make it indicate more or less that it's for the entire table. If you have things like group summaries and grand summaries, you can definitely do that. Okay, that was a bit of a shorter module. That's fine because you need some time at the end to do some practice on this because it's a bit of a crazy function. And again, don't feel bad using the help. They have good examples you can start from using help or question mark, the name of the function, summary rows or grand summary rows. Great. So that's how you create summary rows. And there was a question at the beginning, and I want to just restate it. There's a function called the extract summary, and you give it a GT table. And if there's any summary rows, it'll give you a list containing tables inside that list by group, and also telling you if it's a grand summary or not. So you can get the data back out, is what I mean. So if you need to validate your data, otherwise it's a bit of a black hole of data that you don't know. You can't really check because it's just going to the GT API. There's a way to get it. Good. Okay, so now we're on module 6. So this is all about using a number of convenience functions. They're based on options in tab options. That giant function, which has, I don't know, maybe 50 different options in it, perhaps more. This exposes a number of the common ones and even has a few arguments in there. So it'll try to do good things to changing the options for you without a lot of trouble searching for them, so which is great. So we have things like you can change the footnote marks, the sequence of them, essentially. We can add row striping or not. By default, it's off, but we can activate it here. We can change the alignment of the table header. We can do a thing which is a bit strange, I suppose, but we can set certain Chrome around the table to be in all caps and a little bit shrunken down, almost like small caps. This might be desirable in some cases where you want to have a table with a certain look. We can change row lines. You can either put them all in or take them all away. We can add an outline to the table or take it away. We can change the font for the entire table. And if you really need to customize your HTML table to an extreme, you can use opt CSS to add in CSS statements, like CSS rules. And I'll show you a bit of that, how that works, because it's a bit involved, all I can say. Okay, footnote marks. This one's an easier one. What you do here is, if you have footnotes and you have marks, those are essentially the glyphs that are, the footnote labels, not the labels, not the label text, but like the numbers or the letters. You can change them here with this marks argument. So here's an example. And what I'll do is I'll change this a number of times. So here we have marks as standard. Okay, haven't seen that before, but what's available in here is you can either use a vector of the marks, you can use numbers. Oh, sorry, not numbers like that, but numbers as text. And here we are. We can use, I was confused between that and this, letters. So the vector letters. We can use the capital letters, like that. So we have capital A, capital B. And you saw standard. We can also do something called extended. Fortunately, you won't be able to see them here, but it's in the help. It's a set of symbols, but there's a few more. I think there's like 8 symbols. And what happens when you reach the end of the symbol list, it'll just repeat the symbols multiple times. It'll recycle, it'll run through that list again, this time doubling up the symbol. Okay, So that's marked. And obviously you can do, well, it's not obvious, but you could do this too. Like just add any symbols you like so. Hard to find, but you know, things like that. Let's run this again. There they are. Okay, so that's changing your footnote marks with a simple, easier to expose function. I mean, this is also in tab footnotes, or sorry, tab options, but you have to hunt around and find it. So more desirable, just use opt footnote marks. Okay. So the next one is opt row striping. Originally when GT was released, striping was on by default, and there were options to take that out, like to not have row striping. Right now, it doesn't have row striping. It basically, each row is you know, not striped. But you could turn it on. So here's a long-winded example of making a table. Then finally, the thing we want is right here, where it defaults to true, I believe. That's why you're calling the function. So let's do this. There we go. And it's probably going to be almost impossible to see this depending on the connection, but this one's not striped. This one is slightly darker color. This one not. This one is. And it doesn't happen in the summary rows, but you just get them in the body rows, which I hope is the right thing. I think it's probably better that way. So you can do that, or so basically row striping, it's on, and just as you can turn it on, you can turn it off. This is very strange, but just showing that the false does exist and it's not on again. Essentially, you're changing again. Okay. Okay, row striping. And table header, it's centered by default. But maybe that's not what you want. I mean, certainly in ggplot, the title and the subtitle are left aligned. This allows you to choose left, right, or center. So let me show you how it looks when it's aligned left. It's not too bad. And if you don't really like that, it's too far left aligned, you could use TabStyle. And the style would be, I think it's cell text. And you would use indent. You can do, say, 5 pixels. This is like review. Locations would be cells title. And groups would be, I don't know if this works, title, subtitle. Well, not great, it didn't work. You have to call it twice. I think when you access the location cells title, you have to do it twice. It's a bit of a silly thing. You could do this and just repeat it. And then just choose title and then subtitle for the repeated cells title calls. But anyways, there's a chance to mix up these things, to align left and to still style this with an indent. So yeah, there you go. You can left indent your header. So opt all caps. This is something you can do with tab options, but it requires setting a bunch of different options at once. So what it allows you to do is, if you take it by default, it'll put these locations in all caps. It'll form the text for you. So this is the same table as before, just now we're using opt all caps. So it does this. It basically bolds the text, makes it a bit smaller, puts it in capitals. And certainly you could change the locations. So say you just want the stub to be like that, you can do this. See, now just the text inside the stub is modified in that way. So it might be good. It might be something you need, maybe not, but it's there if you do need it. So table lines. It's a bit extreme. You can have all lines, like a fully aligned table, none, or the default. Okay, so let's try it. Let's do opt table lines. We'll choose the first one. So all lines in the table are now there at their, default widths. Okay, got a question about row striping. It doesn't include the row label, but you can include that as well. You'd have to go into tab options and say row striping stub, set that to true. So basically the opt row striping is a very minimal, less option, function, which does the simplest thing, but you can certainly go into tab options and have more control over where you want the striping. So you can have the striping either just in the stub, in both the stub and the body, or just in the body. So there's like 3 options there. So yeah, that's all lines, all possible lines. You see even the outline is there. And we can change this to extent being none, and that essentially annihilates all lines. Why would you want this? You want this. Who knows? You may just have text and you want it to be like this. But and then the nice thing is it sets a default, and you can just add lines from there. So you're starting from a baseline of no lines, and you're just adding the lines you need. So that's one possible use of this. Okay, opt table outline. It's similar to opt table lines, except we're just dealing with the outline, and we have some control over how that outline is styled. So it'll put an outline around the table. So the same table as before, putting an outline. Let's have a look at it. So it doesn't add all the other lines as before, sort of the maximal amount of lines, but it does add a table outline. And we do have some options about how to style it. We can say pixels 5. There we go. So a much thicker outline around the table. We can change the color. There we go. So we can do that. And there's also another option, style. There we go. I mean, it doesn't look great, but hey, maybe it's good. Maybe you like it, so you can do that. And similarly, you can do width equals, I believe if you choose none. Oh, I'm wrong. There's other options there. Oh, weird. Okay. None is supposed to take it away, but I guess it doesn't. Okay, I guess if you have options here, it does not do that, but let's see if it does it here. Okay, so none doesn't work, but that's okay. Usually when you use opt table outline, you probably want to add an outline and not remove it. Opt table font. So this is one function where you can take an entire table and set a font to all the text in the table. So before we saw in TabStyle, we can set fonts for different parts, targeted parts of the table. With this, we just set the font for the entire table. We can still use TabStyle to go further and, style those parts. But the default font for the table will be one we supply here. Okay, let me show you that. So in this case, we have the font, and it's actually a list. A list is actually useful here because we want to have some fallback fonts in case Google Fonts is not accessible. Then we at least have some other fonts to use, and these are system fonts. We can also specify other Google fonts. But if this one's gone, most likely the service is down or it's not reachable. Let me run this. Yeah, so that's the entire table is now using Meriwether. And we can change this to be a font that's not there. This doesn't exist. It will actually use Cochin in that case. There. Because I can't find this, it goes to the next in the list. If this is not found, it'll go to serif, which is sort of like the first serif font it finds in your system. Bring it back. We do go back to, oh, sorry, the data there. We do go back to Meriwether. So that's op table font. You can use Google Fonts or not. You can just specify a number of system fonts. Okay. I want to show you this other function here called default fonts. All that is a vector of fonts. Let me just list that out for you here. So these are fonts that GT uses, like by default. So it'll use this if it's there. If it's not there, it'll use this. Otherwise, it'll keep going down the list until it finds a font on your system. Okay, and we can use that as part of like the, like the font list that we supply in op table font. That way we can sort of take advantage of all the fonts we normally would use. So at the front of this list, we can just say we want Helvetica Neue, or we want Segoy UI instead. And because it's available on my system, it's being used. And otherwise, it would just go down to the default fonts. So we'll see here, because these ones are not found, it's going to go back to the very first font on this list, which is the Apple system one. Good. Okay. So that's a opt table font. We move down to the last function in this module. We're doing pretty good for time. Opt CSS. If you're making an HTML output table and you know CSS or are interested in using CSS to modify the table, you can certainly take advantage of this function. So what you would do is you'd add this statement to the end, add your CSS string, which I'll show you at the bottom. And these defaults, you normally don't have to change. They're just there saying you're adding rules. Okay, so let's take a look at this. This is the before table. So we have number, num and currency, scientific notation, and also in currency values. But one thing we want to do is we want to add some CSS rules because, say, for instance, there's things we can't do with TabStyle, things we can't do with tab options. We want to use CSS. So the first thing we need to do is use an ID value for the table. The reason we do this is we don't want like the CSS rules to leak across other tables on the page, say for an R Markdown document. So we essentially give the GT table an ID value. And then in op CSS, we supply the string of style rules. So we start with the ID of the table, which is 1. And then we can like reach into certain classes and change their properties. You have to know a bit about the table to see this, but I'll show you how you would do this. So I'm going to run this. And there it is. So what we're doing here is we're changing the background color to sky blue. And that's just for the GT table class. It affects these rows. For GT row, we're changing the padding. So the padding is now super expanded, 20 pixels on both sides. And for the GT call heading, which is right here, we're centering it. Instead of keeping it right aligned like it normally would. It's different from the actual content. And we're saying important because we're overriding a rule that's more specific to it. So we can add this important statement. Okay, let me show you how this works. You could right-click any table. This would be in the viewer, this could be on a web page. Inspect element. Most browsers have this, but all browsers do. Right-click that. What you get is this inspector pane. Okay, it eventually shows up and it gives us, we can hover over these things. We can also use this target tool and select certain things. We see the class names there. We see .GT row, GT right. If you click that, you can see GT row right here. We set 20, 30. We can try out new levels of padding, like say padding 40 px, and that changes things on all sides, a lot of padding. So taking this, we can see that 1 GT row, we can change that up here. So let's do just 40 px. Let's get rid of this, rerun the entire chunk, and see now we have that large padding. So this is how you sort of, using the inspectors, is sort of how you discover parts of the table their classes, and you can try out in that inspector different styles, even discover them a bit, and then you can apply them right here. So bring them over to here and remake the table. So you can make a very customized table with this CSS function. And once you get the hang of it, it's not that bad. The key is just to inspect the element, find the element, find the different rules, or sorry, the different selectors or classes, and then determine which things you want to apply to them. And I think that just about wraps it up, almost for the entire workshop here. For the next 20 minutes, I can answer questions. Bring me all your questions, and definitely take a bit of time to do this. It just gives you some things to practice on. But to sum up, these opt functions, opt footnote marks, you can use letters, capital letters, standard, extended, or custom sequence with inside of C. Row striping, with opt row striping, you can turn it on or off. Mostly just going to turn it on. Title and subtitle can be aligned with opt align table header. Opt all caps is if you want the capitalized look for column labels, row group labels in the stub. Opt table lines, you can add all the lines possible or remove them all. And a table outline can be done with opt table outline. Table font can be done or can be added with opt table font. And it goes well with Google font. And if you look in this info function, you'll get some names of some good ones. Or you can go to the website. I think it's fonts.google.com. You can do crazy things with the CSS, with opt CSS. Just know it's there. Sometimes you may want to change a thing that you can't easily change in the API. So that's where this becomes useful. And yeah, that'll be it. I'm definitely ready for any questions you may have. Oh, yeah, survey. We do have a survey. John reminded me of that. The link is over here. I'm going to paste that into the chat so it's easily clickable. If you'd please fill us out. Let us know what you thought of this workshop. Yeah. 1 second. I'm just going to send this to everybody. There we are. Now it's in there. Recording will be available after the workshop. Certainly it will be available. I'm not sure in what capacity. John or Bella, what's the way for distributing, for having access to? Oh, sharing. Awesome.
Yeah, we encourage everyone to fill out the survey as soon as possible so that you don't forget about it. And yeah, we will be sharing the recording shortly. John earlier said that right now the recording is in .zoom format. We will do some editing before we release it.
Hey, Bella, it's Harvey here.
Hi, Harvey.
Sorry, I just jumped back on the call. Yeah, what we tend to do is to pull it back from a local copy, do some editing, and then we got a YouTube channel that we'll upload it to probably over the weekend or early next week.
Yep, I just gave the link to the YouTube page.
Oh, awesome.
Yep, in the chat box.
Rich, I have a couple of more questions.
Yeah.
If your voice is still surviving.
Well, I have a bunch of lozenges here. You may have heard me chewing on them. I have tea, water, me through. I don't talk this much. Okay. Yeah, ask me a question.
Yeah, so I came from the SaaS world. So,
yeah.
So the SaaS ODS is something I really miss. So the idea is to get the p-value or whatever statistics from a procedure in SaaS, kind of like the say like in R, it will be the LM function.
Yeah.
SAS would have a data set ready for us to basically.
So you're saying this,
yeah.
So SAS proc would basically transform your data for you in ways you specify.
It give you the output in the SAS data set. So I was thinking if LM is connected to GT in some way so that we don't need to grab the p-value from.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right now, GT summary, which is, have you heard of that? It's a package based on GT, but does what it tries to do is do essentially a lot of summary stuff for you, so you don't have to do it like in with dplyr or something like that. It's basically a one-stop solution to creating summaries and making the GT table itself.
But then
yeah,
say like it's a p-value or some like standard error, those kind of statistics.
Yeah, I think that's what GT summary does for you. Like it'll take output from LM and tons of other models like survival models, anything, almost everything from that Broom supports, and maybe even more actually. It'll actually generate the table for you and format it nicely. And the great thing about it is the GT table is still a GT object. You can keep going with the GT API if you're not satisfied. But usually they put so much work into it that it looks great, without further extension of it. Like the object you get from it is pretty much amazing. I would encourage you to look at the link that Phil supplied in the chat.
Thank you. So,
you're welcome.
Yeah, another question is after we generate all those RTF, normally we will use another program or software to staple them together. And what we stapler, we were using a kind of a script to staple them together.
Oh, you mean put the tables like in one document, or to put them?
Yeah. I wonder if R or GT has something similar to that.
Well, for that, you'd probably want to use R Markdown because it handles the document, and then the tables would be within the document. Unfortunately, right now, we don't have Word output support, so it kind of like makes it almost impossible unless you have screenshots of your tables, which is what you may not want. So the next bit of work will be creating native Word tables that can be used in a Word document in R Markdown. That way you have you have the document flow, plus you have the tables within them and whatever else. Yeah, so that's the missing piece, really, if you want to, have an all-in-one solution.
Right. So in that case, we will have to source the original files, because for us, when we generate tables, it's each program correspond to one table normally.
Yeah.
Or repeats. It could be several tables.
Yeah, that seems like something you could do in R Markdown, because R Markdown, what you have is you have code chunks and you just run the code. And if the output, theoretically, of course, we don't have a native Word output yet, but theoretically it would produce a Word table from that function. And then insert it into the document, in the spot that you essentially have the code chunk. And you can omit the code itself. So you just have the output in the document, which is probably what you want for finalized reports.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that should work. I will check it out.
Yeah, that would be great.
So anybody else on the bridge have any questions or thoughts or things that they want to ask Rich in the last few minutes here? You're welcome to go off mute, or you can ask in the chat box.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you, Rich, so much for the great workshop.
Yeah.
So I have two quick questions. One of them is that you already mentioned about Shiny app, about docs and PDF version. So I want to again ask you about that. If we include this GT in a Markdown and get the output like LaTeX output or PDF output, so it seems there should be some. It does not probably works as nice as HTML. And I want to ask that if you have any like hints or idea that where should we expect that challenge? So in the, for example, LaTeX or PDF output. I don't know, does it make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. Right now, you can't really use, it has no parity with things like options or styles. So it can create a very basic table. But the work that needs to be done is to make it almost as good as an HTML table. Because with the right amount of LaTeX packages, we could make it, it can look pretty good. But right now it doesn't have styles. It's probably a little bit buggy as well.
Okay.
That's why it's not currently recommended. But it has a future, and it's something we do want to work on, and it's something we want to get to feature parity with HTML.
Thank you so much. And another question is that have you tried like combining this GT with some other interactive table like package like DT? Is there anything like that that we can combine these two one together?
Unfortunately, you can't combine them right now. But I think on the roadmap, lots of things on the roadmap, is to make interactive tables. So they're similar to DT, maybe don't have all the features like server-side processing, but still at least have a few things like pagination and filtering and row arranging, things like that. But currently, it's going to be a bit disappointing compared to DT, with the interactivity, since there's actually none.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And somebody was talking about looping through parameters or macro variables, and so I gave a list here to a talk by Tom Mock about R Markdown, and he gives some examples there about looping in R Markdown. So you might be able to do something like that with the HTML output. Or Rich, I wasn't sure if you had some other thoughts. Like if somebody had a variable and they wanted to pass like a classroom of like 20 students and they wanted to generate a table for each student, there's per and other looping capabilities, but just thought I'd see what you thought.
Yeah, certainly. If you have a list and you have a function which iterates through, your list of variables or vector variables, that's the approach I would take. Create a custom function that wraps GT, makes a table that you need, and it does a different thing based on, the simple input. And a loop is totally fine for that. Although I think a loop wouldn't work because you're creating like a list of GT tables, or depending on how you're doing it. If you're using, you can't really L-apply through GT tables. What you get in the end is like one object. So that might be a bit challenging.
Okay, I guess what I was thinking, I just gave an example of like an L-apply or per. Could you have a list of parameters that gets passed into an R Markdown HTML output that gets passed into some type of GT table?
Yeah,
HTML based.
That would most likely work. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. What I just gave you in the chat box to the person that asked that is probably your best bet. I'm guessing that would also then work with RTF then. If the R Markdown output is RTF defined, would that be okay, Rich?
You mean RTF document?
Yeah, an RTF document. Like you can specify that the R Markdown output be RTF.
I don't know if that works. What we've done so far is just ensure that the RTF files can be generated.
Got it.
But we're not quite sure that it integrates with RTF document yet.
Okay, via R Markdown. Okay. Got it.
But I would think that using RTF document is a bit of a rare use case. Nobody really wants to make it. Maybe people do. Maybe RTF document is the way to go.
So I think in pharma it's weird. I think the medical writers have a requirement for RTF just because of some legacy, and so.
So did they create entire documents in RTF, like tables and text together?
I think the RTFs come out of SAS, and then the SAS go into these old like BB Excel tools that have been around for like 20 years, and then they output like this final report.
Yeah, that's kind of why we focused on just simple RTF table generation.
Yep.
Files, because we knew in the publishing pipeline, it sort of fits in nicely because that's what you're getting anyways. Collection of RTF files.
I mean, I think the people on the call would know better than I would. So if anybody has any thoughts or comments on this, feel free to speak up.
Certainly having RTF document work and being a shortcut would be a good compromise for now until we get Word document working.
Yeah. Have you guys looked into inserting graphs, ggplot graphs into RTF?
Yeah. Oh, into RTF. That's not yet possible. No. The thing we need to work on is getting images to be represented in the binary format that is required. It's definitely a next step thing. And actually, this is the first time I've heard is that a hard requirement or something that's commonly done?
Yeah, that at least that's where Amgen, my previous company, does. We did a proof of concept of inserting the ggplot output into RTF file.
But not into a table.
Inserting a ggplot plot.
Oh, just into the document, not into the table.
Right.
No.
Right.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a whole different story. That has nothing to do with GT.
Yeah.
It has to do with
Right. But it's a part of the RTF saga, I guess.
Yeah. Certainly, if you use RTF document in R Markdown, it should be able to handle images you put in like ggplot, because that's totally distinct from what GT does. So GT's role in that is to, insert an RTF table in an RTF document.
Right. But the whole package is like a TFL, and normally we do have both tables and the figures.
Yeah, that'd be the next thing we work on. We'll see if we could get RTF document to work well with the current RTF output support. But that'd be not a bad workaround, because once you have an RTF document, you can open that up in Word, and now you have a Word document. As long as everything inside the RTF document is good, more or less.
Right.
All right, 2 more minutes. Anybody have anything critical or thoughts or feedback before we go ahead and end the workshops for the day? Head into tomorrow's last day of workshops, Shiny, PKPD, and we've got also the text modeling one in the afternoon. So.
Yeah, Rich, this was awesome. I really appreciate the time you put into putting this all together. This is good stuff.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. We have saved the chat, Rich. Please expect a long list of issues.
There are a lot of copies of the chat being saved.
Yeah, bring it on.